plan, just to give you frame of reference. And we made changes in 3 different areas of the site, 2 of which will fall under the purview of the Conservation Commission. The third is really ancillary to our use, but I'll just talk about it very, very briefly. In short, what we have done is largely centered around the southerly portion of our site development. So the area that you're seeing here and that I'm zooming in on, just below this image is that southerly fire pond that we walked out in the field, the edge of the existing pavement for the office park. And let me just, let me add a little annotation here. Forgive me for one moment, just so I can highlight things for you. The existing edge of the parking lot, is right about here where this yellow line is. And what we did on our previous application is we had building 4, which is still 3 stories, still 48 units. It was located approximately here in the red circle, the red rectangle. And then this area between was our parking field. What we have elected to do is we've inverted that design. So the darkened lines on this plan is building 4. So we've moved building 4 closer to the edge of the parking lot and the southerly fire ponds and pond. And then we have put the parking on the north side of it. The reason for this is as we are furthering our design, we are looking at efficiencies of construction. And the commission may recall that under the initial application, this area was relegated to subsurface drainage. And in order to utilize that for subsurface drainage, we needed to maintain required separation distances from the groundwater table to the bottom of our system. And what that did is that fixed the elevations that we needed at that back parking lot. And it required that this rear area, just generally about here, was elevated. It would be a lot of import fill. By inverting the building and the parking lot, we were actually able to lower this building elevation about 3 feet and lower the parking lot about 3 feet, on average. And we did that by removing the drainage from this lower portion and consolidating it with the drainage that is by the easterly or underneath the easterly parking tray. Okay, so all of the drainage is now in a single location. It is still a large subsurface field. It's consolidation of the 2 prior. We added a few extra chambers, but it is by and large the same. But then when we come up to the easterly tray, the commission may recall, we had this red square was a structured garage. We have relocated that southerly, so it was adjacent to building 4 now. So the entirety of this area, and I'm just generalizing the outline for you, is now parking. It's all parking. It's an asphalt parking field with drainage underneath it. But because we've eliminated the garage, we have been able to shift the edge of the parking lot approximately 10.5 feet westerly. So that's further away from the riverfront, further away from the buffer zones, the main annual high water line, basically all of the resource areas that matter, about 10.5 feet westerly. At the same time, we've eliminated parking in these shaded areas, or impervious surface, if you will, has been reduced in these shaded areas. And what we've done is we've relocated this further away and more proximate to building 2 and outside of the resource areas or the resource area buffers more particularly. Just to remind the commission, this purple line here represents the 200-foot outer riparian, the riverfront buffer zone. This pink line is the 100, and the green line and the orange line are the 25 and the 100-foot respectively. But in doing so, in terms of shifting this parking tray about 10.5 feet, what we've also been able to do is we had a retaining wall that was installed to make sure we held the 25-foot local no disturb buffer firm. We've been able to eliminate that retaining wall and simply go to a standard sloping condition to make up that grade. So this entirety of the area along here will now be earthen slope, loamed and seeded, will allow it to vegetate. It'll be landscaped in accordance with our landscaping plan, but we've eliminated now that wall element that we discussed in the field and had that marked out there. All totaled, between these two areas, just to zoom out a little bit, we have been able to reduce along the southerly portion of the site. We have been able to reduce impervious surfaces within resource area buffers by just over 2,600 square feet, 2,623 to be exact. And in the easterly tray, we've reduced 2,839 square feet within the 100-foot riverfront and the 100-foot BBW buffer, and then an additional 374 within the 200 riverfront area. So that nets of a little more than 5,500 square feet of impervious reduction because of these shifts. The third area, just for the sake of completeness, on the westerly portion of our site, well away from jurisdictional areas, we tucked the pavement in here an additional 5.5 feet to pull it away from our property line. An operational move to make our truck turns work, and we also wanted to get some drainage swales in here. But I just wanted to denote what that area represents. In terms of supporting data, because we've relocated the data, the drainage to a single consolidated field, we wanted to make sure you are updated with all of that newest information. So you have in the package all of our HydroCAD data and our subsurface calculations, which I'll summarize for you, basically are exactly the same. We simply took two separate areas, put them together, but the combined release from that field is about the same as what you saw in the original application. So there is no increase of pre-development rates of runoff, pre-development rates of volume, certainly at Great Brook. We still have, not really highlighted on this plan, we are still requesting permission to infill the isolated wetland areas and replicate those one-to-one. And we will still also replicate the bordering land subject to flooding areas that we talked about in our previous hearings. So those are still impacted areas, and we still do meet the compensatory flood storage calculations, even with these changes in total. We did not make any modifications, as I really zoom in here, we did not make any modifications to the replication footprint or the bordering land subject to flooding replication to make sure all of those numbers were accurately replicated and achieved. And that's it. So what we'd ask the commission to do is to consider the notice of intent relative to this plan, because in our opinion, it is an improvement over what we had prior. We have been able to minimize the impervious surfaces just ever so much more. We did make changes out of necessity for constructability, but we think at the end of the day, this is obviously our opinion, would be anxious to hear yours, that we've accommodated some pretty good improvements. And one of the things that would draw your attention to down here at Building 4 is the ability to invert. The fact that Building 4 is closer to the edge of the existing traveled way and pavement and the pond might perceptively be seen to be bad. Well, you move that building close. Well, we did. But what we did in turn, though, is we've taken the parking and taken it entirely out of the buffer zone. We've removed the opportunity for any pollutants in that area, any introduction of oil, gases, sediment loading, et cetera. So we've sought to do a coordinated benefit between our necessity to improve some of the grading and the import material required and what the commission might otherwise deem as more beneficial to the wetland resource areas. No encroachments beyond what's out there now in terms of impervious surfaces. The TOA slopes that I showed you in the field will remain. They're just obviously slightly modified to wrap around Building 4 as opposed to the parking field that we had before. So that's the background. I'm happy to answer any questions that any members of the commission may have. And we appreciate the continued coordination here.
Sure. Thank you. That was a pretty good update from what I did. Rebecca did send us out the package. I did have a chance to look through it quickly, but this kind of helps me to understand it more. As you stated, seeing the building switched was a little, at first that seemed it seemed like a big move, but I do take your point, and even looking at the plans before the meeting, I could see how it almost buffers against parking lot trash and more outdoor areas. Yeah, and I can see it argued both ways, but so I guess the first question I had was what's behind the building here? I'm sure it's an access road for emergency vehicles, but is there any parking, like single lots at all behind the building? Are there like units that open up with yards behind the building?
So it is not access for fire vehicles. So the area that I'm circling in blue is simply a sidewalk. This
Sidewalk,
is what,
okay.
It's a sidewalk for the unit. So wherever you see these double arrows, these are entry points to a common corridor within the building. So it's access for the residents to walk on the sidewalk to access those back doors. Now, it's certainly accessible to the fire department on foot. They can access around the building. They can set up a ladder if they need to. They can perform emergency rescue, but it is not intended for travel by vehicles. So let me just clear my drawings here. So the limit of vehicle access is here and here in terms of the proximity to building 4. So everything shaded on this side
Actually, don't put in the
is vehicular access.
Yeah, and I'm assuming they can get to the back fire pond. I'm assuming that was part of the plan.
So what we'll provide to the fire department, and this is on the plans, it's on the utility plans.
Yeah.
Is we are installing for them, and I'm just going to draw it here real quick since I'm on this plan. Right here will be a dry fire standpipe.
Okay, that's
and we will have a pipe driven, a penstock driven inside that pond. So they would be able to come out and suction water from that pond as part of their regional fire demands. So we've given them access along this path that they can stage their fire truck here to draw from that fire pond if they needed to, which is what Chief Lagonder had asked us to provide early on.
Okay, and again, it's not so much jurisdictional to us, so I really can't go too deep into it. I'm just wondering on the maintenance on a pipe like that. I mean, that area is kind of getting terraformed anyways, and everything's getting ripped out, so I can see laying the pipe at that time not being a problem. But how is it to maintain? Because I know the other ones, every few years they have to come before the commission to talk about maintenance. But if it's, well, go ahead. I'll let you answer that. But I was going to say that's why I was curious if the fire department's seen this, if they're going to look for something different.
So they've not seen this. We're presenting it to you first because we're currently in front of you, but we'll circulate it through the chief. You will have many additional opportunities to walk through everything with them. In terms of maintenance, it is a zero maintenance, other than if the screen at the end of the penstock gets clogged. The intake. If there's leaf debris, if it sucks in sediment, that's a bit of a maintenance requirement. But short of that, that's all we would do. So if we had to come back in front of you, or more importantly, what we'd look to do is, should you entertain an order of conditions here, would ask you to consider a condition that with the penstock in place, routine maintenance be allowed, and we can coordinate it through you or the agent through future notification. Not too dissimilar to like the beaver maintenance that we have on site out here now, or the current landowner has out here now. Sort of a prescribed maintenance plan that's encompassed in the master order of conditions that doesn't necessitate meeting with the commission every time we need to clean it. More of a notification to the commission's agent that we have to clean it. Something like that. Sort of just brainstorming off the cuff, Mr. Chair.
All right. So that kind of answers that question for now, at least. So it's a sidewalk behind the back units open up. I'm trying to think, is there any not barrier, but fence, anything between the sidewalk and the wetland areas?
Not at this point, sir. No, we will just have the transition slope and then it'll be the grade that you see out there with the limited vegetation that you see out there. We don't have limitation barriers proposed on this plan. No fencing, nothing like that.
Okay. And that was, excuse me, and I'll open it up to the commission members in a second, but that was the only other real question I had with the other parking lot. And I do appreciate that you guys brought it in another 10 feet, and and again, I see where you shifted the actual garage to. I realize everything slopes down from the back end of a parking lot to the wetlands. A lot of parking lots tend to have a lot of garbage I don't know. And again, I'll take a look at the maintenance plans and some of the stuff that you submitted. But that's generally one concern is the back end of these parking lots between them and the wetland areas. It just, like I said, I've seen too many where it's just a lot of trash back there that just inevitably it's going to be parking lot straight to a slope down to the wetlands. And the same thing in the back of that building. It's the walkway, which I appreciate. It's a walkway instead of a driveway. I'm happy about that. And right on the other side of that walkway is a downslope right into the wetlands, and everything gets thrown down there, gets blown down there. And that's not to say that people living there that I'm sure they'll all dispose of their trash properly, but inevitably, that's just one of the concerns I have with the newer plans. But I can appreciate, again, why you switched what you switched. I do appreciate where you brought things in a little bit. And I'll just be curious now if other commission members have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns.
Yeah, just a quick question. So what's the distance between the edge of the building and the wetlands in the back?
So the edge of the building from where we were in the closest corner, we're 24.5 feet. 24.5 feet in this lower right-hand corner. That's what this blue dimension represents.
Oh, okay. And then obviously with the walkway, the walkway is obviously closer. Okay.
It is, but it falls within the pavement that's out there now. And that's, again, let me highlight it just to make sure it's as abundantly clear as I can make it, just because I know that that's a very important point, is this represents the existing edge of pavement today. Hopefully everybody can see that red line. Yeah. That's where the parking lot currently ends. So everything that we're doing impervious wise exists within that footprint now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask along those same lines, is there a reason why the building couldn't be moved maybe 2 feet forward or 1.5 feet forward to stay out of the 25 foot? And I realize the sidewalk would still need to be in it, but just curious if that was considered at all.
So we definitely considered it, and part of the initial application that's maintained throughout this one, again, a little cumbersome because I have multiple plans here, but we've tried to consolidate the distance between these buildings as much as possible, that this traveled way is going to be one way to minimize the width of this drive aisle here, then to afford a standard parking garage, and then a 24-foot drive aisle with standard parking. We couldn't support reducing the parking count any further than we already have, unfortunately, which would give us a little bit of flexibility to maybe change the parking directions. So to your question, Mr. Chair, we did look at it. We just couldn't accommodate a further shift. Some things that you might look at, and I'll zoom in here, is we do have separation from the edge of the parking tray to the building, and you look at it and say, well, but you've got green space in there. Why not lose it in there? And the answer to your question philosophically is, well, we technically could, but we do like to keep a healthy buffer between the edge of the pavement and the faces of these buildings. These are residents. There are windows. We do want to landscape it. And I know 2 feet sometimes maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but we're trying to hang on to that, quite frankly.
Right. Other commission members have any initial comments, questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions on the runoff. So can you explain how the runoff from building 4 will work now? And then any overflow, how that's going to be handled from both the parking
I
spaces and the
can.
building?
So the entirety of the parking tray, and I'll just put my drawing tools on again. All of the stormwater runoff from this parking tray and the one through here is all collected, and it goes down. These darkened black lines represent the path of water to catch basins. And what we would seek to do with the building is this would also run off to be collected in that same collection piping, which then ultimately continues on and goes to the easterly subsurface field. Now, on the back side of the building, if I'm just clearing and again, drawing the imaginary ridge line, where we have roof lines and gutters and downspouts, we would have drainage that does want to run in this fashion based on the way the grades work. Now that roof runoff for purposes of treatment under the stormwater standards is considered clean. So it doesn't have to be captured. And as long as it's controlled in terms of its release, in terms of erosion potential, which we would bring the water down to grade and let it run off naturally down our slope, we would allow that water to continue to feed that pond naturally off of the building and off of the back of the sidewalk.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other initial comments, questions from commission members?
Yeah, I think, Phil, I thought I saw that you're like 75% complete with the design. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we typically, when we're dealing with permit drawings, we refer to them as 75% complete, but we have to go through a detailing exercise to make sure they're finite and constructible.
Okay, no other anticipated major changes?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca, did you have any comments and or questions regarding the revised plans?
I did actually. I had a couple that I didn't have coming into this meeting. One being associated with the sidewalk and the building. I agree with your approach and I appreciate that shift. But in relation to that, a lot of, and it's relative, as Brian, I think, was getting at as well, a lot of times Chief Legendre and public safety require certain dimensions around the building so that they can access it. I don't have those dimensions, but I just want to be sure that both to your benefit and our benefit, the commission isn't looking at something that we say, yes, this is great, but then you actually need to make more, so you have to come back to us anyways. Again, that's really not, in a sense, has nothing to do with the commission other than to just highlight that now. So I'm happy that Brian highlighted that, but I also wanted to flag it.
Rebecca, before you
Yep.
move on, can I address it real quick? Just we'll sort of
Sure.
bullet point it.
Sure.
The NFPA code supplemented by 527 CMR is very specific.
Okay.
And what it says in there is that all points of the building need to be accessible within 250 feet from a staged fire truck.
Okay.
So in this particular case, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the chief,
Yep.
but I'm sort of purporting why I'm confident, is that if he were to stage a fire truck here or a fire truck here at the end, so long as he can access by foot all portions of this building not to exceed 250 feet, it is code compliant.
Okay.
So my suggestion to you is that we would not make further changes because of code related matters, because it is compliant.
Okay. And that, like I said, I appreciate you noting that. Like I said, that's just something that often comes up. So regarding the sidewalk, which I think is a great addition for both the residents and the community, that is asphalt, I'm presuming,
Yes.
as currently proposed. I might, because then you're having the roof runoff come down, land, and then flow across it. I might suggest the commission, or through the commission, that they might request more of a pervious material, whether that be a pervious as pavement or a crushed stone or small gravel. And the reason why is both for that runoff purpose, but also further reducing the impervious surfaces. And I understand and I do appreciate again that you're staying within the existing impervious area, but where you're altering that area anyways, I don't see why. I don't think it'd be a significant cost, and maintenance as well. I think it'd be equivalent to maintaining asphalt. And it's within that 25-foot area, understanding that we're under the Wetlands Protection Act, not the local bylaw, acknowledging all of that. I still think that's a reasonable ask, at least for that portion where it's adjacent to that BVW. The area further away, still within the 100, or just outside of the 100 rather, I think it would be helpful to have that be more of a pervious material, but I'm really less concerned about it there. And let me see, did I have anything else around that building? And the other item was related to the runoff, being able to, it's a relatively short distance. I mean, a little further than it is today, I think, from getting untreated runoff from the parking area to this, which is, as you stated, roof runoff going into the resource area. But I was unsure if you had considered maybe directing it towards the west and having it run over that vegetated surface. Again, when you have that, if you do a pervious walkway, I think it'll act as the same in regards of just treating or having a partial treatment before entering into the resource area. You had mentioned the parking area to the east further as well, which again, I appreciate moving that and echo the commission's appreciation for shifting that outside or further outside jurisdictional areas. My question is, you had mentioned what's now going to be a slope versus the retaining wall, which is great. My question related to that, you had mentioned landscaping. And I was curious about if you had a landscaping plan for the areas within jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. I understand you might have one for the entirety of the site, which I'm sure the commission would be happy to look at the entirety of the site, but obviously within their jurisdictional areas to understand. And I'm not, maybe I missed it in the original packet, but I wasn't sure if that was included or not. And let me, for this area, the other item I had was the outlet. So the area, yes, that riprap area. I wasn't sure if, again, just turning, it's more of a detail question and suggestion, is shifting it so it's not directly aimed towards. So again, just giving the area a little bit more time to filter out across a naturally or relatively natural vegetated surface, a little bit more time before it hits that resource area.
Okay. Just to jump in the middle, in terms of landscaping plans, we did have a landscaping plan for the site, which did include the buffer zones. I did not provide an updated landscaping plan in the information that you just received, but we certainly can. The updated landscaping plan that is in the package is wholly focused on the replication area and the plantings there, which again is the same plan that you had already seen, so no new information there. If you or the commission, I'm just going to change the view here. If you or the commission had a particular preference in terms of the retention time coming out of here, we can certainly, whatever angle suits you to preference is fine by us.
Okay.
You know, there is something to be said because of the proximity to the replication area and the flood storage. If you would like these more directed that they would initially feed the replication zone for hydraulically and saturated soil speaking, we could do that, or it can just run over the natural ground towards the existing BVW mean annual high water line of the brook. We can work with that preference, however you'd see it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So to clarify, that you sort of answered my question about whether the landscaping plan was included or not. So I realized the replication and flood storage, associated area, and associated landscaping plan is included. What I'm talking about is for the entirety of the site regarding areas that are going to be, if they're going to be maintained as lawn within the buffer riverfront area, or are they going to be maintained as meadow. I think that's helpful for the commission as well, so they can understand the implications of that. So that's more of what I'm referring to. And if I'm interpreting your response properly, it sounds like we did not receive that as of yet, but it sounds like it's something you may have.
Yeah, yes to both of those questions. You didn't receive it for this plan. It wasn't
Okay.
available.
Yeah.
But it's information that we of course have
Okay.
and can
I
get
think-
can get to you. Yeah.
So obviously that's subject to the commission's request, but I think that would be helpful. And it sounded like when you were talking about the dry hydrant area. So I guess including in that information, it may be helpful as the commission is considering at whatever time that may be any sort of conditions for a project. It would be helpful if there's ongoing maintenance items to be included in what I would suggest an operation and maintenance plan, whether that be something that's required as far as the replication and the stormwater, but also areas like this where they're a little bit more specialized, or areas within the buffer or BVW that you're potentially going to be maintaining in perpetuity. My other question, now that we're to this dry hydrant, is the detail on the plans that you had submitted specific
the-
to that hydrant?
Not for the dry hydrant, no.
What about for the piping connecting it to the?
The piping is shown, but there is no detail to the piping if you're looking for, you know.
So, for the commission and to our chair, I think that would be very helpful to incorporate, considering you're installing it directly within the resource area and then most likely trenching or piping through to connect outside of the jurisdictional area. And then let me see. Talked about landscaping. The other item I did not see on the plans or on the revised plans was any areas as for snow storage. So again, that's something that could be included in like an operation maintenance document, but that's something that's helpful because as it exists today, they do store it in the middle of the parking area, which is good because it's not right up against the resource area. Building 4 is placed there. I would see at least that portion wouldn't be of concern, but just making sure as far as next to building 2 there, that parking area doesn't just push it into the resource area or push it into the compensatory flood storage or the replication area.
To answer that question, I just flipped over to the layout plan. So you'll notice this hatch pattern on the plans. It is included. We do have notations of snow storage. In the area of the resource areas and the buffers, these are very thin strips basically for shoulder plowing, if you will. You know, typically what you would see on the side of a roadway, but not for piled snow. So there's no notations for piled snow within the parking lots, certainly no notations for piled snow within the buffer zones or the resource areas, just that simple snow shelf right at the edge, you know, just very narrowly around the site. And then, you know, operationally, you know, we'll find areas for stored snow that exist outside of conservation zones.
Okay.
So that is on the plans.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, and I was more looking for like the condensed storage area, because as we all know, we have some either really crazy winters when it comes to snow or relatively mild. But I do appreciate you highlighting that. In addition to that, what I will remind the commission is on other projects throughout town, the commission has required snow fencing to be placed at the limit of work. And in regards to fencing, I know the chair had mentioned, is there any adjacent to the proposed building 4 between the sidewalk potentially and the resource area potentially at the top of the slope? I think that's a great idea to memorialize areas that maybe are left to naturalize and maybe don't require extensive maintenance, but maybe just once a year or something like that. In addition to that, maybe it's you continue whatever that fencing may be or boulder placement around to delineate the limit of snow storage area. And the reason why is because, again, we have some really strong winters, some years, and it's really easy to see a physical delineation versus someone who's hired, whether it be someone who's on staff or someone who's hired to come in to then do that snow removal. And then it's just very straightforward instead of having an unfortunate violation and we have to come in and deal with it that way. Then my last, or two of my last questions or comments are the parking medians. Are those proposed to be impervious, pervious? Are they plantings? Are they lights with plantings? What is the design of those?
Pervious, they will have planting, some will have trees, some will have lights. So,
Okay.
so yes to most of what you said, but not impervious. So they're not striped islands, if you will. So it's not a sea of asphalt with a painted stripe. They are raised curved islands with planted material.
Okay, and do we have a detail of that or no at this time?
You have the detail from the landscaping plan, which
Yeah.
is in the original package, obviously slightly out of date relative to these changes.
But that in terms of what those are, it's the same of what is being installed in them as the original.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. Yes. So
Okay.
even though they may have shifted 10 feet, it's still the same material. Yes.
Okay, so that should be okay then. Then lastly, for now, is the any irrigation connections, I presume. So you had brought up your landscaping a couple times before, whether it be in front of the buildings or over within riverfront area. If there are irrigation connections or trenching that needs to occur, that detail needs to be included on the plans as well, if it is not already. So if that needs to be incorporated as a separate sheet, that's fine. But the commission needs to see all that infrastructure within the jurisdictional areas at the very least, if not the entirety of the site.
Okay. We do not have irrigation shown on the current plans.
Okay. I mean, and if you're using rain barrels and doing it that way, that's fine too, but we'll need to see that. I think that's what I have at the present moment, Mr. Chair. I don't know if you have any other items that I miss.
Let me open it up first to the public. Do we have any members of the public here tonight to comment on this particular project? And I'm not seeing any.
I see none at this time.
No. So I don't have additional, I mean, I have some additional questions, but no real additional questions at this time. And basically, would you be open to a pervious pavement for the walkway? Well, possibly making that shift or at least looking into it. Because I guess the things we're kind of looking for at this point would be that updated landscaping plan, the details for the piping for the fire department, an OMP plan specifically to that snow removal, and if they're going to be salting and sanding those lots, and are they picking up the salt and sand afterwards, or their catchment for that. Some of the fencing memorializing. And I think those were the things that have come up this evening that I think I would like to see before we make any final decisions. But I think in general, I don't have any other additional questions at this point in time. And I'm relatively comfortable with the change you have made as far as moving that building and pulling that other parking lot in and some of the other where you've moved the pavement on the other side of the property. But other commission members have any comments or questions at this point in time? Not seeing any. So Phil, would you be all right if we continue this to our next meeting so that we can get some of that stuff from you? And the other thing I would say too is that
Yeah.
if you have a chance to talk to the chief, I think that would be great. I have no doubt that you are in compliance and like you may be fine, but I've seen a lot of plans have to change just for public safety
Sure.
reasons, which I can respect.
Sure.
But again, it might just save us time down the road.
Sure. Yeah, we would be okay with a continuance, Mr. Chairman, and, I have your wish list here, and I'll consult with Mark, obviously, offline, and we'll come back to your response, but most notably, we'll consult with the fire chief to confirm that he's fine with the changes. So that way, we've tied off all the loose ends.
Okay. All right. Rebecca, our next meeting is the 29th. Right. And do we have our first open time on the schedule is
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. All right. In that case, I'd like to make a motion that we continue the public hearing for 580 Main Street, DEP file number 112-019 until our next public hearing, Tuesday, November 29th at 7 o'clock p.m. Do I hear a second for continuing?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, starting with Jim,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Jillian,
Aye.
and Rebecca, I'm an aye as well.
Thank you. We'll
right,
see you in a
thank you,
couple
guys.
weeks.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. How are we on time? Everybody ready to continue? Okay. So at this point, the Bolton Conservation Commission will now continue the public hearing under Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, to consider a notice of intent for the proposed Mallard Lane development on South Bolton Road, DEP file number 112-0717. Is the applicant or representative for the applicant here this evening?
Yes, I am.
All right. And Rebecca, can I ask, are there any updates or changes since the last time we met?
There are not that I'm aware of. The continuation was based on the request to further review the peer review letters that the applicant has provided to the commission to understand some of the stormwater parameters on site.
Okay. And I have had a chance to look through those, and thank you for sending all of those out, Rebecca. I was relatively comfortable looking through them. The peer reviewer did take into account a lot of the things that we would normally look at as far as the offsets go, and how the development was laid out relative to the space available. I didn't have any major questions after reading through those. I was relatively comfortable with those. Curious if other members of the commission had any thoughts, feelings, or questions after looking through all of that.
I would agree with you, Brian. I thought it was covered most of the questions we had.
Rebecca, I know you had looked through them before, but did you have any additional thoughts regarding this property? Have we heard back from like DEP at all?
So DEP did not have any extensive questions on it. They appreciated the layout and pulling things outside of jurisdictional area as far as the structures. But I do not have anything further at this time. I know the last meeting, or the meeting prior, Mr. Chair, you had basically requested and we had discussed what were my questions, and that's pulling things obviously outside of jurisdictional areas, and then also trying to move infrastructure like the different tanks or the wellheads or the
That's right.
outlet areas and moving it outside of or further away from jurisdictional areas. The roadway, I think, was the only thing that really couldn't be moved, and then one of the structures. So I guess that's part of the summary as well, as far as where we've come from and where we are now.
And if I remember correctly, Jim, you were able to move one of those tanks out, I believe.
Yes, on unit 8, I believe. Yeah, if you look at the offsets, they're basically off the structure and off the property line 10 feet. And it would go just outside the guardrail area on the access road slash driveway. So we're able to pull that out, that propane tank. And we could probably pull the well out a little bit too. I think outside the buffer zone. Because we on unit 8, it kind of sits in right in the center of the property. Some of those others that we can't move are mainly like we're trying to keep the 20 foot between the structures
Yeah.
open for the fire department, and then keep 20 feet off the property lines to confirm with zoning, even though we didn't have to. But so on unit 8 had the most flexibility on the tank and the well.
Commission members have any additional questions, comments at this point? Okay. Any members of the public here to comment on this evening? I'm not seeing any. All right. Rebecca, if we were to close this hearing tonight, do you think you'd be able to memorialize basically those things that we discussed this evening, that the tank would be moved, or we can get additional plans that has the tank moved?
We would definitely need the additional plans before we close the hearing,
Okay,
because once it's closed, we can't accept any
Yeah.
new information.
okay,
And that's how we've been doing it. But in terms of, could I be working on a draft at the same time? Absolutely.
okay, because that's in that case, Jim, would you be willing to continue the hearing till our next meeting, and in the interim provide an updated plan?
Yes, I've been talking with Dillis and Roy.
Okay,
My project manager is Seth. That's who I've been collaborating with. So we could definitely get the commission updated plan by the next meeting.
okay, and then, if Rebecca can work concurrently to flush out our usual kind of boilerplate conditions that would attach to something like this. I don't think we have any additional major questions. Again, that can change when we do see new plans.
Right.
But from the changes that I think are being made, I don't foresee, and I'll put it out to the commission members if they
Right.
foresee any major questions or. Okay.
I guess, Brian, the only other thing is, we just mentioned in the last meeting as well, is any landscaping or maintenance that needs to occur within jurisdictional areas, to just include that in a narrative or O&M document. And then snow storage, same thing, just making sure that that's included on those updated plans as far as where you're proposing to put that. I think that would be helpful as well, in terms of any sort of outstanding things that I could see popping up at the last minute.
And Jim, do you think all that would be possible?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just gotta be a little careful. We did show the snow storage and all that previously, because that's what the ZBA had asked us also. So we have those documents, and we do have a landscape plan already done. It was already submitted to the commission. So my understanding is if we pull some of that infrastructure that's in the buffer zone out, that we would be set. I don't want it to grow into something else at this point, because we worked hard on those plans and they have been plan reviewed. So I have to be careful what I agree to. I don't want to yes the commission to death and then have them be disappointed with me at the next meeting. So as long as I get a clear mission about moving the well and the propane tank outside the buffer zone, and if the commission could look at what I already submitted for snow storage and plantings and so on, I'd be hopeful that the commission already viewed it at this point. That's all I ask.
Okay.
Jim,
Yeah,
I was bringing it up again in the event that when you shift those things, that any of that changes. So just updating relevant to any of that shifting.
Yeah, and again, my understanding is I'm moving two things. I'm moving a propane tank and a well. Is that correct?
Yep, and then I don't believe you've submitted it yet, but that outlet structure that wraps around I don't have the plan in front of me right now. The unit that's closest to the vernal pool there.
Yeah, it's unit 8, the one
Yeah,
on the
so unit
left-hand side
8.
coming
So
into the act.
the riprap that sort of was at the back of it regarding the outfall,
Yeah.
shifting that, we had talked last time, shifting it so it's directed between the 200-foot extents. And just again, allowing for more area to be basically out, allowing it to naturally filter over that before getting into the vernal pool.
Right, and I believe the areas that I'm looking to shift those to, those 3 things to are wide open. It's not like I'm
Yes.
going to be putting one of those in a snow storage area or where I'm proposing extensive landscape plantings or anything like that. Most are trees, and our other buffer zoning is on the property line, which we're trying to avoid with this development anyway. So I think I'm in fantastic shape as far as moving those 3 things and not upsetting anything else doing so.
Great.
All right,
Okay.
all right. And everybody comfortable, clear with that as far as commission members go? All right, again, no members of the public here tonight to comment. All right, in that case, I'd like to make a motion that we continue the public hearing for DEP file number 112-0717 on South Bolton Road, proposed Mallard Lane, until our next public hearing, Tuesday, November 29th at 7:15 PM. Do I hear a second for continuing?
Second,
Ryan,
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I would suggest 7:20, as much as I hate to push things out, but where we've run over it twice with the first item. I just want to be a little reasonable. Sorry.
And no, that's perfectly fair. In that case, I'd like to propose that we continue the public hearing for DEP file number 112-0717 South Bolton Road, proposed Mallard Lane development, till our next public hearing, Tuesday, November 29th at 7:20 PM. Do I hear a second for that?
second,
All right, all those in favor, starting with Jim,
aye,
Paul,
I,
Jillian,
Aye.
and Rebecca, I'm an aye as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Take care. All right. Rebecca, you had sent around an update from a site visit with John Powers Lane. Do you want to walk us through that real quick?
Sure. I went out today. So just to provide a quick recollection as far as what had occurred and where we are today. We had gotten a complaint about a fence and alterations within not only jurisdictional resource area under the local bylaw and Wetlands Protection Act, but then also into the town-owned open space. Since that time, the property owners have been working to come into compliance. I went out today because they had reached out and said, given an update that they felt they were in compliance. I went out and looked. The remaining items were just seeding the area because we were in a drought. It didn't make sense to do that midsummer. Also, we're officially out of the drought. We've got that announcement today. However, the other item was removing the fence posts with the footing. So they had a concrete footing with a metal post. And that has been completed as well. So what is left is just simply waiting for growth. So what I had suggested in the site visit report was just that the applicant, or rather, excuse me, the property owner provide a quick image update come spring. The property owner had also stated that she will be reseeding the area as well, just to make sure that it's coming in, which I thought was a great idea. And she's also further working to naturalize the area, moving some down logs into what was a pathway, and then removing some of the gravel as it sort of shifts through the ground as we get the different frost heaves. So as far as it stands today, I think they're in compliance and they'll be working to continue to be in compliance. So the commission, I guess the ask of the commission is do they wish to lift the enforcement order at this time and just basically make a vote establishing that? Or at times the commission has waited until there is the 75% success rate, and at which time, so that would be in the spring, at which time you would make the vote. But between now and spring, there's really nothing that is anticipated to be done due to just waiting for the growth to be successful.
I'll let other commission members weigh in, but generally speaking, I like to do that one growing season. At least I know I'm usually in construction, new construction would do 2 growing seasons, something like this, where it's just a replication. I think one would be appropriate before lifting. But I'm happy to hear what other commission members have to say on that.
I think that's reasonable, Brian, 1 growing season.
Right. And if everybody's fine with that, Rebecca, so we really don't need to take an action to it. And I was gonna say, if you talk to them, if you can just inform them that, again, we appreciate them coming into compliance. And that, you know, we just want to give it the 1 growing season, and we see no other reason why we wouldn't lift the enforcement order.
Yes, I can definitely follow up with them tomorrow morning.
That's excellent. Thank you. Regarding the minutes, I have not had a chance to read through them or look through them at all. And I would suggest we table it because I don't think anybody wants to sit here and watch me read through them now. If anybody else has gone through the minutes and has any edits, updates, changes, please put them out there now. But if not, I'd kind of like to table this and just approve 2 meetings worth of minutes at next meeting. Okay. All right. Do you want to get into our lovely budget discussion?
Sure, I can.
Yes,
So
please.
it has once again come the time of year when we look at what we've done in the past, what we're doing this year and have already done this year, and looking into FY24. We're now in FY23. And seeing where we are in the budget is what we've requested in the past sufficient. The budget message this year has been to really try to retain a level funded budget, but acknowledging that there are different reasons, whether it be for inflation or other things. I spoke with Brian on the phone, as well as the town administrator, to let him know, or let them both know, that we do have some one-time increase in cost within the budget. So whether that ends up being a line item or an article at town meeting, I think, need to talk with the town administrator on that, as far as how to approach it. Those 2 items are, and then I'll pull up what we had requested last year and go through that briefly. Those 2 items are, 1, in relation to the assessment we had of the Bower Springs earthen dams. We know that there is degradation to those earthen dams. It's one of our most popular, highly trafficked conservation areas, and we'd like to keep it that way. At least that is the excellent feedback I have heard. That being said, when we had the assessments done, there should not be woody vegetation along the earthen dams. And to just clarify for the public and the commission, that does not mean the total circumference of both ponds. What that means is the areas of the earthen dam, which does take up quite a bit of what you could consider the shoreline or the bank. But the woody vegetation being there is what is causing these holes that we're starting to see. And so what we would look to do is to remove those larger woody vegetation and keep it vegetated with more of an herbaceous mix or an herbaceous species. That I did speak to one arboriculture professional, and they had stated that it will be $10,000 or under. I'm looking to get an actual number from them, and then we'll see what that will be. $10,000 or more is a capital expenditure request. So that's another process, which I am happy to go through for the commission and go through with you if that comes to fruition. But if it's not, then it goes line item, and we will, obviously it will be a significant increase of that line item. And again, I'll talk through that in a minute. The other side of that project that we realized through that assessment and was established by GZA, along with the woody vegetation removal, is that those earthen dams need to have material added to them and graded, so that basically it won't be further degraded over time. They'll retain their structural integrity and again provide pedestrian access into the future as well, so increasing the longevity of that property. I did not get a number on that. I have reached out to a couple of individuals to just get an order of magnitude cost. So I am not sure what that side of it will be, but that again would be considered either as a capital expenditure request and or a line item increase. Then in addition to that, we have our Mass Trails or Bolton Trails Connectivity Improvement Project, which we received. However, there is a match component of that. So the match component of that includes volunteer time, but it also includes about $9,000 of match funding. So that is something we unfortunately lost the private funding that was promised in the beginning for unfortunately personal reasons. And so going from there, because we have the grant funds, I think it's a really defensible reason to get those funds. It's improving 9 crossings, and it's also improving our trails that we see a lot of traffic on. And in addition to that, these are going to be accessible crossings. So wider, more stable, less slippery, can accommodate a lot of different user types versus just someone who's able to walk across. So that being said, those are sort of the 2 largest increases that I would encourage the commission to request. As always, we've been looking at other grant funding opportunities, and I'm just not seeing one that matches either of those directly yet anyway. The other 2 items that I'd mentioned to Brian is one is a brush hog or brush mower that is easier to transport than the current large brush hog, and specifically through the trails that may be narrower, or we don't want to be increasing the width of them, but just maintaining the current width. What we have now, it works great. It is a much older piece of equipment, and it does require a small trailer. I have no problem pulling a small trailer, but on some of our properties where it's a 1-car parking area, it becomes a little cumbersome to do. And in addition to that, walking through the trail, again, on those more sensitive sites, we can't really be sensitive with a large brush hog. And then the other item is just a backpack sprayer, and that's relative to the poison ivy mix that we had discussed previously. So just the vinegar, the salt, and the Dawn dish soap mixture that we talked about to address poison ivy. We are trying to do that more on some of our less sensitive areas to see how it works. It does seem to be working well in the areas we've tried it thus far. Springtime will really tell us that, but that is a piece of equipment I do not have, and for this use, it would be very appropriate, I think. And so the backpack sprayer is about probably $85 at most. There are battery-powered ones that are more expensive. I don't think that's necessary. And in addition to that, I don't have an exact cost for the more compact brush hog, but that can range sometimes from a couple $100 to $1,000. Obviously, we'd look at something that's more cost effective, but I can certainly get that to the commission after this meeting. So that all being said, those are what I had seen as an increase in cost. I will share the snippet of our current, if I can zoom into this. So here we have I'm sorry, one moment. I don't know why this is doing that. I apologize. Here we have, can everyone read this? I'm sorry. It's
I
kind of
can.
slow. Okay. Thank you, Brian. So we have this is also in the drive that I had shared with you all. We have it's just clicked to remove the wages component and then the account numbers, just for privacy reasons, the account numbers. I don't want to be sharing those to the general public. These are our line items as they exist today. I don't know what it would take to add a line item. I don't think that's necessary, where when we have these potential increases of one-time costs, I think we can fit them in with the line item, but just maybe add a note to it for advisory that says this is what it's for, it's a one-time cost, and go into a little bit further detail. So the first item is purchase of services. This is when we're purchasing or contracting out for more general services, whether it be peer review. We've done different consultants. We've done land surveys out of this as well. Not recently, but I'm saying what it might be used for last year. So all the way over to the right, you have the change to last year. So just showing what we decreased and then what we increased. This, I apologize, I didn't include the years. This is
are years.
FY
Yeah, I know.
23.
That's current year, right?
So this is current.
Yeah.
Then we have FY 22, 21, and so forth. So I think these two are really the most relevant, but just for sort of looking at a history snapshot, it's helpful to have those other numbers. So in the past, we actually went down significantly in land maintenance. Land maintenance is used for our mowing or our mowing contract of Butternut and Bowers, because there are two meadow conservation properties. It takes a little bit of different equipment than I have accessible to me. You can't use a lawnmower on that. It's more of a rough cut. And we actually have hired someone who specializes in invasive species as well. So while they're out there, they will give us an update on the invasive species, which the past 2 years, what we've done is we've held specific work parties to address those areas versus having that individual be contracted to manage those invasive species, which has been working out well, but it's a lot, as you probably hear from our volunteers, that we're very grateful for, but it's an immense effort on one property, forget about across 2,000 acres. So that's what land maintenance is typically for. The training, we try to budget for, and I believe it's going to be the same request for this year. We try to budget for at least everyone, how the amount breaks down is for all the members we have currently to attend the annual conference. Whether you attend that or not, that's basically what we base the training off of. So if you don't attend, what it does, it allows for other members to be attending different training opportunities throughout the year associated with the Conservation Commission jurisdiction duties, but again, that number is how we estimate that number and how we request that number is based on what MACC requires for their annual environmental conference for each of our members. So now we have 6 members, whatever the cost of that is per member, that is what that number will be. If you would like me to base that off of a different training opportunity that you've maybe found, you want to increase or decrease that number, I'm happy to do that, but I really think that's a sound way to approach it. And this year we actually have had a couple members take advantage of that, which is what we like to see, what I like to see. So that's another thing too. If you hear of a training coming up, please let me know and I can double check what we have left in the budget. Then we have the vernal pool study. We've actually gone down on that cost for the purposes of, we actually have a great group of volunteers from a high school that go out and voluntarily do it. So this is basically the cost of, if commission members or other individuals wanted to volunteer to do it, you think of, well, it will pay for their gas or transportation in that sense. But they also changed their Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, changed their certification so that you can actually do it all on the computer. You don't need to be submitting things, so you can do it all through your phone for the most part as well, to fill out the form and submit it. So they've simplified it versus having to mail something in. So those funds would be used for that, in addition to hiring someone to come out and collect the data. Advertising this year, because we've filed quite a couple permits for the commission regarding upgrading crossings, we actually are over our budget for that line item, but not within the total budget this year. Advertising, typically $100 is enough because we typically don't have too many projects going on. Knowing that that Bowers project is coming up, at least that one, that will be one of 100. So if $100, I think right now the Bolton Independent might charge $65 per. So maybe we want to increase that to at least cover 2 ads in case we need to do that. But that's really what that advertisement fund is for. The supplies, that's office supplies. I don't see a reason to increase that at that time unless you see that something that's in another category can be purchased under that line item, basically. The in-state travel, so that's gas money, mileage. If there's a conference or training that you go to that requires like parking, if you park in a parking garage, you have to pay for parking, that can come from that fund as well. So that is what we have right now. Typically, this is paying because I use my personal vehicle for site visits, going to get to a site to go out and do trail maintenance. That's normally what it's for, is mileage, and then parking, as I mentioned before. But this is also available for commission members too. So if that needs to be increased, then we can certainly do that. If you feel it's reasonable the way it is, that's fine as well. Then the dues. So the dues are relative to and estimated off of the different organizations that we are part of. So that's, of course, MACC. They send out their bill. It's based on how many commission members we have, what their rates are this year. And then we're also a member of MSMCP, which is Massachusetts Society of Municipal Conservation Professionals. Sorry. And so those are dues associated with that as well. That helps, again, pay for trainings. And those are my counterparts across the state. And it offers us sometimes trainings with DEP, conferences with DEP. So I do think that that is helpful to continue, both for you and to make sure you have educated staff. The other item is land capital improvement. We have used this to pay for our beaver flow devices that we have throughout the conservation properties. And this is for annual maintenance. And then, of course, under that annual maintenance, they have various guarantees and warranties. So this allows them, if they see something while they're out there inspecting, they can repair it, and it doesn't cost extra unless something needs to be replaced in whole. Then, of course, so like last year, we did a replacement of one that had been in place for quite a long time. But that's typically where it comes from. I haven't heard of a significant increase yet. Before the commission votes to approve the budget, though, I will be reaching out over the next week to the individual who maintains those for us to see what their rates are this year, to make sure we're still within that area. Within that cost and amount. Equipment, we've kept at 500. I think that's sufficient. This includes whether it be chains, gas, oil, for like the chainsaws we have weed trimmers, the brush hog. It includes maintenance of the brush hog, maintenance of the chainsaw as necessary, maintenance of like things that I can't do. Then that could also be, I can use that if the commission would like, to purchase like the backpack sprayer, a different brush hog, but that again may shift slightly. Maybe we'll go back up to the 671 to accommodate that. But again, acknowledging that it's a one-time purchase, it's not going to be a continual increase. And then last year, the conservation fund, we did increase it to $1,000, and we basically did that. We level funded the entire budget from FY22. I looked into the budget and said, well, here's what we can alter. We can reduce it from the purchase of services, from the vernal pool study, and add another $500. So the budget stayed level funded, but we just altered around some of the line items. Now, this year, I think the vernal pool study, that can stay the same. But so typically the conservation fund is at 500. Over the years, the commission is well aware that, you know, this builds through donations, but we're not allowed to ask for donations. So it's sort of, people do make those donations once in a while, which is very welcomed. But we're not allowed to do fundraising to feed that. That's why it's important that we have partners like the Conservation Trust, SVT, that can do that sort of work. Now, all that being said, we did expend the funds for the Taggart purchase, which was a significant gain for the town. But now we're left with minimal funds, if any, within our conservation fund that supports land acquisition, any work that would contribute to land acquisition, like surveys, or if we need to do any assessments prior to or conservation restriction purchases. And we, as of right now, we don't have sufficient funds to even act on something like that. So that's what the conservation fund does, is it contributes to, it builds. And this line item at the end of each year, we then transfer into the revolving fund of the conservation fund. And that does not go back to the general fund each year. So that is a long way of saying, regarding the conservation fund, I think it's sufficient where it is. However, I know that's the point of conversation every time at advisory, and I think rightfully so to an extent. But knowing that, and you know, I ran through the items that we had last year and sort of some upcoming costs. I would hand it back over to you, Mr. Chair, if you feel there are any other questions or any other things that you've noticed throughout the year that should be getting addressed or should be maybe addressed differently that would alter the budget in any way. I'm happy to accommodate that. I just would like to know justification so that I can defend it for you all. That's all.
Sure. I don't even know where to start. No, thank you. You know, it was a really good rundown on everything we try to do and breaking down each available line. Trying to think where I want to start. So just remember, the commission advisory is going to at some point sit down with us to go through this budget, and they go line by line with every department. Several years ago, they had started asking us to come up with 3- and 5-year plans. And again, thank you to Rebecca. She provided them with a lot of information. Advisory has taken a very good approach, basically, to our budgeting process. It's been pretty good, and we have done what we were asked in many ways in order to level fund, which you can see going back all the fiscal years. We basically stayed level. I mean, went up like $200 a couple of years ago. We actually had brought it down a little bit at some point based on the economy and other things that were happening in town. But we have managed to level fund for a few years. But that said, as Rebecca had brought up, there are things like equipment like that smaller brush hog and stuff like that that we've really put off on upgrading or doing because we have level funded for many years. But I think we're getting to a point where we can't. And one of the big ones too is going to be the Bowers project it's really been clear that people want to save Bowers or preserve Bowers as it is, and it's just going to encumber funds. So we're definitely going to need to put in for that. We're going to have to go over this year, and I'm worried about cutting too many things. I can see we could talk about training and what's actually been used the last few years. Travel, it struck me somewhat like other commission members, you are more than entitled to apply for travel reimbursement if you drive to a conference or anything. I'm more than happy to pay for my own travel. I wonder, Rebecca, if that's sufficient for what you need for travel. If it's something you just max out every year and eat the rest, or if it's a realistic plan of what you spend, even if it's out of town travel when you have to go to a conference or something like that, or go to meet somebody offsite. That's about it. And again, with the conservation fund, I've always been pushing that one because for years it just lay dormant. They just did nothing. There was good money in it. It was, I can't think, what's the name of the farm that's attached to Bowers that connects with Bowers?
Freedom Farm?
The Wibby. It's basically the whole APR that connects to Bowers on the Bolton side was paid for out of the conservation fund. That's where I think that was one of its big expenses originally, and then it was down to like about 30,000, which it just kind of stayed at forever, and we started putting $100 back into it, and then we blew the whole thing out for Taggart, which is great. It was used the way it was supposed to be used, but the argument I've always tried to make when we looked at what the conservation fund was originally, and it was very much a generational thing, and basically what we've done in the last 20 years is blow out everything the last generation had saved for conservation. And it's one of those like, all right, we need to start putting money back in this. So I want to look at the budget, Rebecca, and I kind of want to talk to you some more depending, but I'll probably ask to bump that line again. I mean, it wasn't at zero. It was left at 100 for like 10 years. I felt like, and it was like, great. We put away $1,000 to buy land. So then we did the 100, and we're like, all right, we'll do 500, 500, 500, 1,000. But, if we keep doing it this way, we'll put 20,000 back in there in the next, 15 years. Like, great. That's not going to really help anybody. I always feel we got to bump it a little every year. And I've always made the case too with planning to, or advisory, I should say, that, yeah, we're going to keep coming back and asking for this. And I'll be happy to go with you, Rebecca, and to defend the budget and to make the case for that one. If it's a no-go, it's a no-go, but I will happily make that case for you, or make that case in front of them. And that was the last one thing I was going to say. Sorry, now that I'm rambling, is that talking with Rebecca this afternoon, they want the budget submitted by the 28th. Our next meeting is the 29th. And the hope was, and I'll let you answer in a minute, Rebecca, that we could buy that extra day. So I'd love for commission members to have a chance to really take a look at it, give you some chance to think about it. You can email Rebecca with questions, comments, concerns. We'll put together a final budget, and then we can vote on it at our next meeting.
So that, yes, Brian, that's the approach that I had suggested, because
Yes.
we're sort of in an awkward spot. I think it may have happened before, and I was granted the kind gesture of being able to submit a draft based on comments I had received from commission members by the 28th, and then vote to accept, and then the final submitted that same Wednesday. Now, I haven't gotten a final answer from my coworker who's in charge of that at this time, but when I do, I will certainly lay that to the board. The worst case scenario is that that's not acceptable, and we'll have to pull together a special meeting, a very short special meeting to just vote the budget, so that I can then submit it, and then it can go to advisory. So that's worst case scenario, but again, if that were to happen, it would be a very short meeting solely for you open the meeting, just voting for the budget and then closing it. It doesn't need to be anything extensive.
So Rebecca, would you be able to send around within the next couple of days a proposed budget that would show proposed for next year? That
Yep.
would include those increases for the dam, for the possible brush hog and backpack sprayer?
Yes.
All right, excellent.
I
Um,
guess my quick question with that, Brian, is
Go ahead.
as of today, and as of this discussion, do you want me to try and incorporate it as in a line item currently? Or do you want me to leave it as a potential capital expenditure request?
I would almost say to put it in a line.
Okay,
Um,
so if it's under that amount, I'll put it as a line item.
I was gonna say, I know after
if it
10
comes
has to
in
go to
over.
bid, it's a whole different thing, but
Yeah.
you know, possibly with land capital improvement. If I
Okay.
remember correctly, that's one that has changed a lot in the past. Where I think we've put projects under land capital improvement in the past where that line has had to grow and we've had to explain it away as a certain project and then it shrinks again the next year.
Yes,
And again, I'll put it out, other commission members have other thoughts, comments on that, because I am no accountant. All right,
Well, I just have a couple of
Please, Paul.
questions because it's the first time I'm looking at this budget, and my first reaction is this is quite modest. And I was just curious as to these numbers. Are they represent prior year budget, or do the prior year represent what we actually ended up spending?
both. So to further explain my answer in response, Paul, is yes, this is very tight for a budget to be maintaining 2,000 acres of land. We have, and I tried before advisory to muster together the past year of volunteer hours or approximate, and basically what that equates to. And it's immense in terms of the volunteer hours that are put into maintaining these properties. But in addition to that, so that explains in a sense some of the budget, but in addition to that, each of these items, as I said, I did highlight that this year, and I'll send that to you as well, where we are as of this week regarding what's been expended thus far out of the year. Typically, we don't return a significant amount back to the general fund because the land maintenance item is typically spent out because that's specific to a contracted amount. Same thing with land capital improvements, same thing with advertising, mileage. And to answer Brian's question, for my mileage for work, that is typically sufficient. Normally I'm maybe like $20 under. Sometimes it's like $20 over, but again, it will come from another line item to make up for it. So we always expend within the budget. We're never over what is requested because we can't, obviously. But to answer your question, Paul, at times it does vary, like I said, whether it be by $20 or if, for instance, we have a land capital improvement, like I think it was the last year or the year before, we had to replace one of our flow devices for the beavers. So that ended up coming out of equipment and I think whatever the remaining was for supplies. So that technically we expended over that line item, but it still came within our budget. So if we're under on certain things, sometimes I realize we can get things done within that fiscal year versus waiting and increasing the budget the next year. So then I try and bump it up a year and get it done within the budget. But I can certainly send you last year's expenditures and I'll send you this year's currently as well. And then you can see that for yourself, what I'm talking about.
Okay, no, that's very helpful. And when I assume they're all use it or lose it, except for maybe the conservation fund. Is that something we put aside that
Yes,
grows over time?
that's a great question. So all of these line items return to the general fund at the end of the fiscal year. So if it's not expended, you're correct. It goes back to the general fund. And the commission loses it in general terms. So the conservation fund line item, though, the way we've realized how to address that, so it's not going back to the general fund and actually building on that fund. So there's the conservation fund, which is a line item, and then there's a conservation fund in and of itself, which is through Mass General Law. It's created that way. The commission created it years ago, as Brian was highlighting. So to get it to go from the conservation fund, and which is like a one year item availability. And again, I'm being very general. I know you probably know this more technical terms, but to get to the more of a revolving fund, I forget if it's technically categorized as a revolving fund or not, but to get to that more permanent fund, we have to actually have a transfer. So at the end of each fiscal year, we get requested transfer from the conservation fund line item to the actual conservation fund. They are called the same thing, so it's confusing sometimes, but yes, so that is more of a permanent fund that the commission's able to build over time.
Okay, and this is a whole side question, but just for my education. So I assume there's all kinds of statutes around the fund on how that money can be used, etc.
Correct. So if you go under Mass General Law, there's a whole section on the creation of the conservation fund, what it may be used for. And the commission actually has the ability to vote and restrict that use even further than what the statute does. And at one time, it may have been 2005, or before that time, the commission really dialed in and specified what it can be used for within land acquisition to make sure that it was going towards that use, versus funding like maybe a private parcel survey and just really specifying, not that that occurred, but just to further ensure that that was really black and white as far as what was anticipated from that fund. But I can also send you that information if you'd like.
No, that's okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, I would support the changes that you're proposing. I think this is, considering the budget we have in Bolton, this is really a drop in the bucket, but that's just my opinion.
It all builds on each other though, Paul.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah,
know.
I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate that sentiment.
And I will say, Paul, when Rebecca sends around the actual, like the full budget, our largest line item is salary.
Yeah, no, I
technically we employ Rebecca,
Right.
which is a great employment decision by us.
Mhm.
So that will bump the budget significantly when you see that added as well.
No, that makes sense. I understand.
Yeah. And I guess the one thing we did not say, and Rebecca and I did talk about this briefly on the phone too, is everybody's favorite friend nowadays, inflation. It's not something we've really accounted for. I have to imagine our supply costs will go up, our purchases of services, like the vendors we used. I have to imagine that pinch is coming on just about everything across the board here. So, and again, I don't want to ever use the word padding, but we might look, Rebecca, to do a 1 or 2% increase on certain lines just to try to account for that. And that's not even the correct number for inflation, and but just those pressures are going to be there, and I'd hate for us to run too skimpy on the budget.
I think that's reasonable, Brian, and thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to mention that. I think specifically where we're going to be looking to contract some parties, whether that be for the Bowers project or our regular maintenance of those meadow areas. I don't have those contracts, obviously, because we don't have the budget yet. The budget comes first, then the contracts. And even in an order of magnitude, going by what we've paid previously, I don't think it may come in just under $7,000 for the coming year, or it may be 7,500. I don't know, and I think that's really what we need to be reasonable about, where everyone's coming out of the pandemic. Fuel prices are going up or changing seemingly in all different ways, in addition to materials. So I think it's a good thing to acknowledge. And if if you want me to add 1 to 2%, I think that's fine. I think we just need, again, justification for and a standard as far as what it's being increased by,
Yeah,
so that
right.
I can be able to defend that. That's all.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, in the past, training, have we come close to that? Have we used it to cover other things? I guess I should say, shouldn't say usually, a number of years we'll have 1 or 2 members that attend the conference. Sometimes we'll have 3 or 4, but it's rare that we'll have all 6 or 7 attend the conference. I do like your reasoning for where you got it to where you got it. Just wondering if we base it off past years when we had 6 people, just trying to see anywhere we can save like $200 so we can bump something else $200, for inflationary reasons, without us going crazy with the budget or them seeing a huge leap this year with the extra projects we're going to need to put on there. And again, we can defend and explain them quite well, but just anywhere we can save something, that'd be great. I'm sure they would appreciate.
Yep, I'm happy to comb through this as usual and see where we can shift some things around for sure.
All right. So any other questions regarding the budget right now? Okay. All right. So if you could kind of send us that around when you have a chance, Rebecca, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I will do that tomorrow regarding what we've spent today and then from last year's budget too, and then updating with the projects. So you should get 3 either spreadsheets or images of spreadsheets from me over the next day or 2. Do you want me to run through the updates, Brian?
That would be excellent.
Okay, so the Bolton Trails Connectivity Improvement Project, that is a placeholder and will remain on our agenda until that project is completed. Both myself and the grant administrator were actually away for similar reasons, and they will be back in the office. Right now, we're going through what the grant considers an initiation phase, so just reviewing contract documents for the contract, draft documents basically from their organization and then from the town. And then once those are complete and the initiation phase is complete and we have some back and forth conversation, then we sign the contracts and proceed. So at this time, it's just waiting. I hope to be reviewing those documents by the end of this week, if not next week, excuse me, before the holiday. And I will let you all know when we're starting with that. To note, I did mention too about the budget associated with it. And so that will be part of those conversations as well. And they are aware of those circumstances and they didn't pull back or anything like that. It's just, okay, this is how we're going to proceed and address that. We have an event coming up that the Bolton Conservation Trust really headed the effort on. They wanted to do a day after Thanksgiving walk, which I am always pro getting people outdoors after the holiday versus shopping. Sorry for people who enjoy that. But so this year they actually wanted to host it on the newly acquired Taggart Forest land parcel, which is very exciting. And we got temporary permission from a private property owner. So we actually will have a route from the Forbush Millfield parking area up Sand Road through the Lancaster Cemetery, which we actually got permission from last year to be creating a trail across the back portion of, and then through the private property into the Taggart Forest land. That is really the landscape scale plan for that area anyway. So it's very exciting to have this walk. And it's, like I said, co-hosted by the Bolton Conservation Trust. Pre-registration is not required, but if you would like to let us know if you are coming, that would be great and appreciated, I think. But that will be at 10 a.m. on the 25th, the day after Thanksgiving. So please join us if you are not otherwise occupied. I think it's great. We typically get a good turnout for day after holiday walks. So I hope that we get the same for this one in particular. And hopefully not as cold as it was the day after Thanksgiving last year, because I was out on the trails and I think everything froze. So that being said, our next update is for the MVP program. Our current project is working on the Lawns. It's the 2-year project with partnering with Clinton, our partner community. We are working on the Lawns and Landscapes section of the project. So we've done the site visits in Clinton. Coming up, we'll be doing site visits in Bolton. And basically, we're looking at areas that either function really well or could use some improvement, or areas that really are just left as they are. There's no infrastructure on them, there's no maintenance, but there's a lot of invasives creeping in. And how could we use these parcels to actually benefit, increase resiliency within the town, and then also increase more nature-based solutions within those parcels. So it's been actually a really good experience thus far. We've had a lot of great stakeholders involved. So if you are interested in that, you're more than welcome to attend the meetings and or communicate with our excellent team of consultants, myself, and or we have our climate resilient website specific to the project. I encourage you to explore that as well. And of course, I will update you when we have the Bolton site visits, which I will be participating in. But a lot of good, just natural conversations come up and organic conversations come up. And we get a lot of great feedback from those conversations out in the field, physically there. So if anything, I encourage you to participate at least in that component if you're able. And it's just fun to get outdoors. The other opportunities we have, the volunteer land steward position is still open. And then we have the open space and recreation plan subcommittee. So the open space and recreation plan needs to be updated prior to 2024. So I will be sending out a survey within the next couple of weeks. In that survey, it includes a question of whether or not someone's interested in serving on that subcommittee. And what it will be entailing is starting January of this coming year, we will be starting the update and really looking at updating the recreational component of the OSRP, because now we have our recreational coordinator. We have a few more programs than we had in the past regarding our recreational programs within the town of Bolton. We have different parcels now, so we'll be updating the open space mapping. And then in addition to that, we'll be updating the action plan. And that plan basically drives and directs both my work, the recreation coordinator, and then also as a town. So that also feeds into the master plan, feeds into hazard mitigation, all of these plans tied together in sort of a large puzzle piece of how we plan for the future of Bolton. So it's an exciting thing to be a part of. It is a lot of work, but I think it's a great way to know the town and have your insights go into what we'll be doing in the future. I will say the volunteer land steward position has been open for a while. We had 2 volunteer land stewards in the past filling that position, which is great. I've had interns over the summer. I am certainly willing to continue to do interns as well. But that position, just for knowledge of the commission as well, I think Brian's probably the only one here who was there at the creation of that, was really to highlight the need of that. And even though we don't have someone technically in that position right now or named in that position, we do have a couple volunteers who are regularly there from the Bolton Trails Committee, being organizational and directional from coordinating those volunteers, coordinating with me, coordinating with the Conservation Trust. So I think that position is really valuable. Some different commissions have a staff person doing that, and it's a paid opportunity. It's very part-time, and it may just be seasonal. So that's something too, I'm not necessarily saying for this budget season or this budget year, but that's something in the future that if the commission feels, with these other projects that are going on, do we need someone else on staff as well working on the trails? Great. Again, I can't say enough good things about our local volunteers, and whether it be myself getting out and doing the stewardship work, because I truly love it. I enjoy that I get 50-50 in the office and outside, and working with our volunteers, but there are times when I have to be in the office doing permit work because things are coming in, we have a meeting coming up, and I can't get out to address something right away. Our volunteers are great. We can certainly depend on them, but I don't ever want them to feel too overwhelmed with what is going on within the town. So I mentioned all that just because we were talking about the budget tonight and just acknowledging that that is something that's funded in other towns. Again, whenever the opportunity arises, I do try to get grant funding for a specific project to fund that opportunity. But just acknowledging that while we're talking about budget as well, maybe something for the future, that's all. And of course, with these opportunities, individuals can contact me directly. You're muted, Brian.
Sorry. Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Any commission members have any new business to discuss? Being none, I'd like to make a motion that we hereby adjourn the Tuesday, November 15th, 2022 meeting of the Bolton Conservation Commission. Do I hear a second for adjourning?
Second.
All those in favor, starting with Jim,
Aye.
Paul,
I
Jillian,
Aye.
and Rebecca. I am an aye as well.
Great. Thank you all so very much.
Thanks. Good night, everyone. Rebecca, I hope you're feeling better. Thank you for sticking it out this evening. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
thank
Recording
you.
stopped.
I am surviving, but I'm definitely going to go take my inhaler now. So thank you.
Go get some sleep. All right. See everybody.
Good night.